Okay, I guess we'll get started. It's exactly 1 o'clock. Want to welcome everybody. We're doing our first touch on a public little meeting here for all of the owners and property managers, introducing some short-term rental changes that could be coming down the pipe. So welcome to all of you. We're going to record this meeting today and it'll be posted on our city's YouTube. My name is Erin Greaves. I'm the communications manager at the City of McCall. I have a few staff members on the line today. We have Michelle Gurnevelt, who'll be doing our presentation. Bessie Jo Wagner is our clerk. And I should also lead that Michelle Gurnevelt is actually the Community and Economic Development Director. Bessie Jo Wagner, the clerk. Brian Parker, who's our city planner, and Meredith Todd, who's our assistant city planner. And I think that covers everyone. We're going to start with a presentation by Michelle, talking a little bit how we got here and what's coming. And then we'll open it up to some questions. So at the bottom of your screen, you'll have your hand raise option as well as your chat option. And you can use your chat to type in a question, which I'll be monitoring, or you can raise your hand and wait for us to give you to call on you. Please try to stay on mute just so everybody can be heard and everything goes well. And please feel free to chat me if you have any questions as we're moving forward. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to Michelle, who is sharing her screen for you.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone. Erin, I'm wondering if people wouldn't mind putting in like their name and kind of why they're here or their association, if they're a property manager, if they're a homeowner with a short-term rental, just so we can get a sense of who's in the focus group. I think that might be helpful for everybody. So just to kick this off, basically the City of McCall is looking at some changes to the short-term rental process, both on the permitting side as well as the regulation side. So I'm going to run through those today, and then if there's any questions, concerns, ideas, we'll definitely cover those at the end. This is a fairly brief presentation, so I'll try to kind of stay high level, but if you have more specific questions, we can kind of dive into that as we move along. So first off, just a definition of short-term rental that we use is basically, it's a resident, it could be single family, it could be multifamily, it could be an accessory dwelling unit. And the idea is that it can be rented overnight for compensation for a period from anywhere from 1 to not more than 30 days. So that's the definition that we use. So just to give you kind of an overview of what's happening with short-term rentals in McCall, we actually have quite a few of them within the city limits, and there are also a lot of them outside of the city within our McCall impact area. Obviously, we often hear that conversation about how short-term rentals impact the availability of housing for local workers. That's kind of not really our focus today. It's maybe more of a secondary impact. But what we really wanted to focus on, because today is sort of how we can manage short-term rentals, not prohibit them, but manage them to mitigate the impacts to both neighborhoods and the character and the actual adjacent neighbors. And then we want to address, one of the main reasons we're looking at this is addressing health and safety issues. So as I mentioned, we've seen quite an increase of short-term rentals, especially in the last 5 years. I think in McCall, we also recognize that it's not short-term rentals, it's not all negative. There are also positive impacts of short-term rentals. A lot of times in the past, we used to have very dark neighborhoods, and now we're seeing a lot more sort of activity happening within our neighborhoods, and we're seeing people utilizing our businesses and our city services, such as our parks. So it creates kind of more of that vibrancy. So like I said, it's an alternative solution to visitors. And so it's not necessarily all negative. There's also economic benefits, as I mentioned, to kind of our local economy. We also collect a local option tax on our hotels, motels, and short-term rentals. So that actually goes into a pool that is then used and allocated for projects to mitigate kind of secondary or impacts from visitors. The other thing is that we've also seen people use short-term rentals to basically help finance their home so that they're able to live in the community. So especially when they have multiple units, such as an ADU, which is an accessory dwelling unit. So I put this up there because we're not necessarily anti short-term rental. We're just about trying to figure out how we can make them work within our community. So within permitting short-term rentals, there's kind of 4 different areas. There's the permitting process, there's the local option tax, which I mentioned, there's the land use regulations, and then there's the code enforcement side. So we're primarily today talking about the permitting and the land use piece. So just to give you a little bit of history, if you're not familiar, when we first kind of started, for the longest time, McCall actually was silent to short-term rentals, and we knew they existed, but we didn't necessarily regulate them. And then we started to just see more and more impacts, especially from the very large ones. So rather than trying to tackle all of them, we took a kind of a very high-level approach and said, let's just manage the really large ones. So those are the ones that that are 20 or more people. At that time, we only had 6 of those within our community. And what we said was, it requires a conditional use permit for new and existing, and that way we could put conditions on those to sort of, again, mitigate secondary impacts within neighborhoods. So actually our ordinance did go to court. It was challenged and it was upheld. So we knew that we were actually administering kind of the state law and our regulations appropriately. So then what happened was we started getting more and more calls and complaints about the other short-term rentals. And so the council decided to go ahead and start looking at regulating all short-term rentals. So at that time, it was a new ordinance was adopted in January of 2020. So we've had a couple of years with it. And at that time, basically, we put in basic regulations under the permitting process for things like parking, occupancy, noise, safety, posting requirements, contact information, clarifying that no events were allowed at them, regulations around camping, trash service, and that all of the short-term rentals required a business license. So that happened in 2020 in January. And since that, we've had kind of time to reflect on what's working, what's not working, and where do we need to go from there. So we basically held 2 work sessions with the city council to talk about those specific things. Obviously, short-term rentals are always kind of hot topics recently in communities. So we kind of walked through some different policy decisions with them to try to get a pulse on what they were interested in doing. The other thing that we did is we looked at 11 other communities, which we call peer cities or rural counties. So you can see those listed. We looked at Driggs, Idaho, Ketchum, Idaho, Sandpoint, South Lake Tahoe, Truckee, Placer County, California, San Bernardino County in California, El Dorado County, Park City, Utah, Jackson Hole, Wyoming, and Bend. So we looked at all of those because it's often good to kind of benchmark what you're doing with other communities and see how some of these communities are obviously very similar with lots of visitation, and kind of see how they're managing it. And one thing I'm not going to go into all the findings of that research. I can probably just highlight a few kind of interesting findings as it relates to that. So let me just tell you first let's see. So these are the kind of the 8 different components that we looked at within each of these communities. So we looked at approvals. So what types of permits or licenses are required to operate short-term rentals? And what we found in this research was that 7 of those communities required some kind of rental permit. Then we wanted to look at, are the permits or the approvals transferable upon a change in ownership? What we found, with the exception of 1, is that all these communities require new permits for new owners. Third, we looked at an inspection process because this was something that our council and we talked with our fire district about during these work sessions. We found out that 7 of these communities actually require some sort of inspection process. We also looked at caps. So there are communities that basically put caps for the total number of short-term rentals within the community. And what we really found was, this is obviously very common in other states. We found within Idaho that Sandpoint was the only place that had some sort of cap on total number of short-term rentals. In terms of occupancy limits, we wanted to figure out how they were determined. And what we found was basically the majority of these places limited occupancy to 2 persons per bedroom. So that was kind of the standard. And in a few cases, maybe they allowed for either an exception for kids or they added a couple more people onto that. We also looked at standards for health and safety and just general kind of land use regulations related to noise, parking, access, trash, changes to exterior, either to the building or the site, posting notices, animal control, and then camping and events. And then lastly, we always look at enforcement to see what other communities are doing in terms of enforcement. And that was kind of all over the board. So that was kind of just a very quick summary. If you want more information on that, we can provide that information to you. So based on that and kind of based on the desire of sort of what we were hearing from the council, these are the suggested changes to the permitting process. So what we're suggesting is that we change what we currently use our standard business license process that is administered by our clerk's department for all businesses. We apply that to the short-term rental. What we're saying is let's have a special permit for short-term rentals with a different application. So that's basically kind of a change in the permit itself. In the past, we've allowed property managers to hold a permit for all of the short-term rentals that they manage. And the change or the suggested change would be to basically require a permit for each unit. So if there's multiple units on one site, you might need 2 units for one site, for example, or one property. That way we can really hold each property accountable for kind of the conditions on that property rather than, one property manager. We also are looking at renewing a renewal to occur annually. I know right now in the business permit process, there's an option to go every 5 years. And really, again, I think because we're focused on health and safety, we want to make sure that these short-term rentals are really complying with especially the health and safety standards. We are working with the McCall Fire District. They're very interested in doing an inspection process. And again, this is kind of health safety types of standards, like making sure that units have, carbon monoxide detectors, fire extinguishers, those sorts of things. So an inspection would be required prior to getting the permit. So that would kind of just be a checkbox. And then lastly, revising the fees to make sure we're covering the cost of administration. So again, like at a city, we don't put permits in place to make any money, but we want to make sure that we're covering the cost of staff time to administer this process. So that's the change in the permitting process. And then these are the suggested changes to the land use codes. So basically we have a definition of events in a definition chapter, but just bringing it into this chapter related to short-term rentals. So we're defining what an event is. We want to make sure that there's safe access that can be maintained to the property. So making sure it's free of obstructions. It's not causing any impacts to either neighbors or the right of way. Right now, our current occupancy is 4 persons per bedroom. And so we're looking at reducing that to 2 person per bedrooms, kind of per our research and just sort of what's pretty normal within a residential type of structure. And then, as I mentioned, the health and safety requirements, those would be kind of rolled into that inspection process, making sure that all of those are in play. And then lastly, just not any exterior changes that would eliminate the appearance of a residential character. We found that in our research, which we didn't have in our code, was just this idea that, again, we want our short-term rentals to feel residential in character and fit into the neighborhood. So we just want to make sure there's not anything dramatic happening sort of on the outside to the building or the site that would change that character. So lastly, this is our proposed timeline. We're holding these focus groups because we want to get feedback from all of you. We've gotten a lot of feedback from our general community up to this point. Once we've taken all this information, we'll basically put it into ordinance form. And so we'll draft ordinances. It would go to the Planning and Zoning Commission first. Then it ultimately goes to our city council for final approval. We'll also work with our county commissioners because we have a McCall impact area. And we administer the planning and zoning codes. This one's a little tricky because it crosses over planning and zoning into some other titles. So we'll have to kind of figure out those details with them. At all of these meetings, there will be public hearings. So there'll be an opportunity for anybody in the public to make comment, either written or showing up in person or attending virtually. Originally, when we had the work sessions, we said our target date for this to be effective would be January 1 of 2023. I'm not sure if we can meet that timeline based on kind of all the things that need to happen, but that was sort of the goal. And then ultimately, once we have everything formalized, we'll have everything posted on our website. And that way you'll have a chance to kind of review the very specific language. But really the purpose of today was to kind of give you a high level of sort of what we're thinking, get any feedback, answer any questions, hear concerns, and also see if there's potentially ideas that all of you might have to make this better. So with that, I'll turn it over to Erin to see if we have any questions. And I'm going to stop sharing.
Okay, well, there's a lot of you, so we're going to do our best. Let's start actually by raising our hands or utilizing our chat window. It looks like Larry's got his hand up, so we'll go ahead and hear from him.
Curious about what kind of health and safety issues have you been encountering with short-term rentals? What is your experience that is causing you to want to do this?
Yeah, so this has kind of come from our fire district as well as our building official. I think in some of the short-term rentals where there's a lot of people crammed in, there's concerns about ingress and egress out of those structures when there are fires or other kind of situations where people have to get out and they're unfamiliar with maybe the layout of the site or the layout of the house itself. We also know that there's probably places where people are sleeping where there isn't, maybe like a legal ingress egress way for somebody to get out of those structures. So I think from just, I think from the fire district's perspective, there's a lot of concern about making sure that these short-term rentals have kind of the proper detectors, have the fire extinguishers, making sure, if they've got wood stoves or fireplaces that they've been cleaned recently, just trying to avoid kind of disasters, within our community.
But have you had specific instances where people have been hurt or died because of a lack of these measures?
So our I don't know if our fire district is on, because I
don't see him. No.
Yeah, they have had calls related to short-term rentals and health safety things related to fires. And so that is where this is coming from. I don't know if anyone specifically died, but that's obviously not our goal. Is we don't want somebody to die.
Yeah.
So let's move to Kathy Laughlin. Are you on, Kathy?
I am on. So I have a lot of comments. I'm going to go through them quickly, but so my first comment is, what is the industry of McCall? The biggest industry is tourism. And I don't want to see you guys make changes to your code to the point where you are going to stop the tourism coming to McCall because someone is going to say, well, you know what, if I want to have I've got, 8 people in my family and it's not an option for me for some of the places, I'm going to go to Sun Valley instead or Park City or wherever instead. So, in the meeting minutes that you had in the last meeting, you guys talked about that the local option tax, you really want to focus on a possibility of taking that local option tax and creating workforce housing. I think that's a great idea, but don't, the local option tax is the icing on the cake created from these rentals. So don't take away the opportunity for these people to have the rentals and to have the occupant load that they've been having, to be able to make the money that they have been making, so that you can get the local option tax in the end. So you know, when we get talking about the safety, life safety, and public health and safety, the International Building Code, as well as the International Fire Code, they don't regulate how many occupants I can have in a bedroom. So if the IBC and the IFC are not regulating how many I can have in a bedroom, why are you trying to regulate how many we're going to have in a bedroom? So my comment on that would be, if I have my family of, you know, 8 or 10 people coming to my house for 2 weeks, what difference is it between my family being there for 2 weeks and then a week later I'm only allowed 6 people or 5 people or 8 people or however many, that we are stopping the you know, the limit at 2 per bedroom? So we're starting to put some more regulations on these. I was fine with the regulations that you guys did in 2020, where you put the limit of 4 per bedroom, but I think you are drastically changing the policy by going to 2 per bedroom. I think you need to really consider maybe keeping it at 4, or compromising and going to 3, because a lot of times those rooms have a double bunk beds, and you have the families that you have 2 families that join together and they've got 5 kids, and it's perfect for a big bunk bed room. So those are just some of the things that I wanted to talk about. On the public health and safety, you know, it is my liability insurance that is covering my property. It shouldn't be the city of McCall so concerned about my property, and it's my it's my liability policy that's covering that. If I have an unsafe condition, it's going to be on my liability. If I have, you know, a fire in my house, it's on my liability. So those are the things that you know, I want to talk about that as well. I am a city planner myself for another municipality, and I know how hard it is to have code enforcement. So how are we going to add more regulations to the city of McCall, and how are you going to enforce this through your code enforcement officers? You guys are going to be overloaded with this. You cannot regulate the 300, 400 VRBOs or Airbnbs that are on that are in McCall right now. It's going to be really difficult for you to do that. And
okay,
then,
Kathy, let's give Michelle an opportunity to
Okay.
respond to those. And then we also have quite a
Okay.
few other people waiting. So Michelle, did you have anything you wanted to comment on that?
I didn't, I just took some notes. So thank you,
Okay,
Kathy, for your
perfect.
comments.
So there was one question that came over on chat, which was asking if infrequent short-term rentals would have to meet the same requirements and pay the same fees as the frequent short-term rentals, especially those who are buying homes specifically for short-term rentals.
At this point, the permitting process, it's the same for all short-term rentals. And because that would be really hard, I think, to actually regulate like how often someone's actually utilizing the property for their personal use versus renting it out. So at this point, I think it applies to anybody who's planning on offering up their home as a short-term rental.
Okay, so next in line, we had Kelly Hill. Kelly, do you want to ask your question?
It wasn't really, I just have a couple of comments to make. I mean, there's so much
Okay.
I could say, but I will start with by saying, you know, I've worked very closely with the city up to this point, and I love the changes that they're making. Honestly, they've really put some thought into this. The one thing that I'm absolutely opposed to is the reduction of people per bedroom from 4 to 2. And there's many reasons for that, but I'll just focus in on a couple issues that I see with that. One is that it's not a one size fits all. We are a very unique community. It'd be different if we were in a condo and every house or every condo is the same and you have every condition the same, but we're not. So I think that this needs to be part of the inspection process, and that these homes do need to be inspected. I mean, there are very unsafe vacation rentals out there. Absolutely. There are some that have bunk beds pressed against the egress windows. That's not okay, but they do need to be inspected. I personally in my rental pool have bedrooms that are 20 by 20. And if we had just one bed in there, I mean, 20 feet by 20 to have, one bed for two people, it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense as long as it's safe. But I think this needs to be a case by case basis. And more importantly, I serve on the local housing committee for McCall, and we've put a lot of effort into strategies for local housing. And I personally have 35 employees, and they're all local. So I just think this may be a situation that may backfire on us, because a family that could normally come up to McCall. I mean, I have a cousin who visits McCall every year. She has 9 children. So there's 11 people in her family. So, and she rents a house that we have on our rental program that has, can accommodate 12. That family probably will not be able to visit McCall anymore, because it's going to limit that same house that they were in to 6 people. So they can't even stay in the same house together unless they want to split up their family. So a lot of families travel together. They meet their family members there in McCall, and normally they would just rent one house. Now they're going to be required to rent 2. So I think that's actually going to increase the demand for short-term rentals in McCall. So I that's where I come from, because I serve both sides of the fence here, but I do see a problem with our local housing. So that was my point. I think that also that we should work together as a group. There are some things that I've suggested to the city about, like noise aware devices and things that, I could really help the city with coming up with some really good solutions that we can, for health and safety reasons, as well as noise and all kinds of other monitoring devices. And I like I said, many times, every time I've talked to the city, I'm happy to sit down and let's discuss this as a group. So that's it.
Okay, well, thank you so much. Let's move on to Brian, known as BB on the screen, if you want to go ahead.
Hi, everybody. It's Brian Balo, and yeah, I live in Boise and also in McCall. And very quickly, I think everyone wants their guests and folks in McCall to be safe. So I think it's good that you're kind of looking into this. But I did note that when you started the presentation, you said that some of the feedback you had from other cities was to make exceptions for minors and for kids under 18 as far as the occupancy limits were. And I think that might satisfy at least 2 or 3 of the people that have already commented about if there were some exceptions. Personally, my viewpoint is because I don't want 20 people that are 18 years or older all crowding into a small neighborhood, parking, or 16 people, whatever the limit is. Whereas I think if in that family situation that the prior speaker mentioned, I think it's reasonable if their grandparents or whatever have a bunk room that they can put, several grandchildren, they're not going to, hopefully the parents are, watching them, and it's not going to be a traffic or parking issue. And, as long as the room meets egress and is safe, I think you can make an exception for guests under 18 and still have that 2 to 3 capacity per the other rooms, if that made sense. And that's it.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to read off of the chat window here really quickly, Michelle. One was, will the short-term policies apply to hotels, motels, and timeshare units? A traditional hotel room will allow for 4 people in a room. What are your thoughts on that?
No, this is really an ordinance that's specific to short-term rentals. Hotels, motels, they fall under different building codes, different permitting and land use, so it's kind of a different deal. I think the issue with short-term rentals is that these are within residential homes. And so they they're generally not built to a commercial standard. So those just fall under different categories for both fire code, building codes, as well as just a regulatory standpoint.
Okay, and one more from the chat window, then we'll get back to the hand raising. Someone offered this, Bessie Joe, this could be for you. What if we paid a 5-year renewal on our business license and we have 4 years left? How would that license work? Do you have any comments on that, or is it too soon for that? Is Bessie Joe on here? Anybody?
I don't see her.
I don't see her. She said she was going to be on. Well, I would assume it would be prorated.
Erin, this is Amanda, and I'm on.
Hi. Great. Hi, Amanda. This is our local option tax administrator, and she's going to be handling short-term rentals moving forward. What did you have to add, Miss Amanda?
The last time we kind of had a meeting as a clerk's department, we were discussing this, and I believe what we're going to do is go through all those current ones that have paid the 5-year, figure out how many years they are into that 5-year renewal, and then we're going to credit them the remainder of the years that they have left.
Okay. All right, let's go to Brent. Actually, I think Tom might have been next. Tom, do you want to go ahead? I think you've been waiting a minute.
Hey, let me unmute. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you, Tom.
Okay, well, my wife and I, Colleen and Tom Mail, have been new to this short-term rental approach, and we really want to applaud the city of McCall for being very thorough, very cooperative, and I think the current regulations have been reasonably thought out. Now, I think we all understand that we want to provide the public with safe environments, and we should bend over backwards to ensure that. One thing I would like to point out, though, that the marketplace really dictates as to where the consumers are going to ultimately lay down. And, you know, with open forums like VRBO and Airbnb, there's a lot of pictures out there for people to choose from. And, you know, you can't overlook the fact that if you have an unsafe place, not too many consumers are going to jump into that. But that being said, we understand as property owners, we want to make sure that our place is safe for the public and the neighbors. Now, what I've heard the most of today, and I think my wife and I concur, is the issue of limiting the amount of space per room. You know, I don't know if that includes 2 adults or 2 children. Do you have any idea the limitations on that current proposal? I would be curious as to that. Maybe I missed something. But the other thing is maybe you could approach this. One lady commented that she has a 20 by 20 bedroom. Maybe there's a better approach to do so many adults living in a square footage of a bedroom. Maybe that would be even-handed. But to take children, you certainly want to make sure they have parents responsible as they reside there to get out of a home in case of a fire. But bunk beds, if you limit one room to 2 people, then you're pretty much taking the grandkids out of the room. So that's the only question I would have and concern. But as I said initially, we've been very pleased with the city of McCall. I would say 99.9% of the people that have used our short-term rentals, I would have them for Christmas dinner. They've been just remarkably good people. So
that's awesome. Michelle, did you have any comment on what Tom mentioned? And then Brent will go to you.
No, I mean, I would just say that, you know, because our current code was, again, we set that number pretty high from 4-person per bedroom, which is a pretty standard way to regulate these. And then we found in our research that actually we were much higher than all the other communities we looked at. Basically, they all have 2-person per bedroom. So that's sort of where that came from. But I'm hearing some good suggestions on maybe there's some other ways to sort of manage occupancy in a different way than per bedroom.
Okay, Brent, you have a question for us? Sorry if I delayed you, sir.
Oh, great. Thank you for hosting this meeting. I guess kind of a little bit concerned. I don't know that I've received any communication from McCall as a short-term rental ordinance was happening. I just learned today, to be honest, of this conversation. So I'd be very hopeful that in future decisions or deliberations that the city would like send out at least emails or mail correspondence about these changes. That'd be very helpful to be aware of. On the whole, let me say I've had a short-term rental for about 6.5 years in Valley County. I have some that have some larger rooms. Let me just say I'm all for safety and individual inspections. I think our guests are really important to care for. I'd love for the fire department to come on in and check, make sure the detectors are working. So safety is great. Like others, my major concern is the occupancy from 4 to 2. That feels not helpful. And I want to echo Kathy's comments. You know, the International Residential Code is set up for a reason with very clear instructions, right? 1 bedroom is 70 square feet. If you add a person, it's 50 extra square feet to that room. So if I do have a 400 square foot room, I think I could have a bunk bed with 6 people in there. And to assume that a room of 150 feet versus 200 feet would have the same occupancy just feels like it's not helpful or responsible, and I think unfair, and just a little bit silly. It's a big waste of space. So I think, again, I hear how commercial codes of hotels are different. The logic doesn't make much sense to me that I can be in a hotel room with 4 people and 120 feet, and yet I'm a room for 400 people, 400 square feet in a residential home, and that's a different regulation. So I really think that IRC would be a great code to use. Of course, we can go into also the issue of children as well. But again, a lot of these recommendations I thoroughly support. And again, I think the individual inspection can really help folks to see. But I would recommend the IRC be a code you use, which is 70 feet for 1 person, 50 additional feet for additional person, and go by that code is much better than assuming a one size fits all for every bedroom. But thank you for this work, and I look forward to further conversation. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. I'm actually going to take this one if you don't mind, Michelle. So there's a couple of different, I mean, obviously we had some council meetings prior where we discussed this, but this is really the first touch before we go out and actually put the ordinance in writing. So a couple different ways. I've never really had this many people in front of me at one time to tell you all how you can learn about what's happening at the city. So I'm going to take the opportunity. So we do have the Text My Gov service, which I can send out to this group if you'd like. And the Text My Gov is great because you can sign up for planning and zoning, general comment, all different types of topics, and then you can get text messages right to your phone. So that is in process, and we have that going now. We also, of course, have this short-term rental list, which was created out of our business licensing. But then, of course, there's the everyday. So we actually have our homepage, which has our calendar on it and shows all of the public meetings, and all of those agendas are listed there. And we also, each week of a council meeting, actually do publish an advertisement telling you what we're talking about. So those are some key ways. There's also a 24-hour Text My Gov line that you can actually just text a message and it'll give you an automatic reply. And if we don't have an answer for it in the system, it'll give me a ping and I'll be able to get back to you on it. So those are just a few ways for you guys to stay in the loop of what's going on as we move forward, but we'll try to do a good job of keeping all of you abreast of what's happening since you've shown, you know, obviously you want to stay engaged. So let's move to Mr. Jones. Oh, you're muted.
Sorry,
I was going to unmute you.
No worries. I was like, oh, I'm on this view where I can see everybody. I'm like, where's that mute button? I would just echo what people are saying on the bathrooms, but you guys have hit that pretty good. Just that one seems kind of illogical to me. I would be curious. We've mentioned, or they've mentioned that there was a lot of information gathered on that, and some places it's even 2. Where has that information been collected from? I guess that'd be Michelle.
Yeah, so we basically looked at 11 peer communities. And so I don't know if you remember, there was a slide, but I can read them off really quick. It was Driggs, Ketchum, Sandpoint, South Lake Tahoe, Truckee, Placer County, San Bernardino County, El Dorado County, Park City, Jackson, and Bend.
Okay, cool. Sorry, I got kicked off and I missed that slide part. So sorry about that.
Yeah, and you know,
Cool.
Something we can do as well as we talked about sharing this information on our website, we can make sure that we dial back some of that and show you where we got this information from. And so we can add that once we have that page going, and I'll make sure to market that out to all of you so you know where to find all this info. Christine had her hand up, and then I have a comment in the chat.
Could I
do you have another
finish real
question?
quick?
Sorry.
Yeah. Sorry, but I think everybody else has kind of said something on the bathrooms that I would probably echo. One thing I would maybe throw out that might be, if some of that's a concern, each room could have a diagram of the home and where fire exits are located or where they should go. If that's the concern, that would be something there. But on the bathrooms, it's with the hotels, and then ironic that in our own personal residences, we're not, but yet if we have some people stay over, then it's like, oh, no. I would like to mention too, like we're talking about housing. One of our concerns is like housing for local employees. Well, I'm local, I live here. I do a few for one in our own home, and then 4 or 5 others for friends. This is a part that helps support my family. And then I work with 2 or 3 others that do the cleaning of those places. This is their major form of income for that as well. So there's a whole ecosystem that revolves around here that, okay, we're looking at, yeah, we need more housing for employees and local people. Well, you do stuff like this, you're taking jobs away from myself and from other people in the community that are using this as a way to be able to live here as well. And I keep feeling like one thing with the short-term rentals, I keep thinking we get blasted as the quick fix for the, because, oh, if you have that, then you should be renting it out long-term. All of my friends that I know that have rented out long-terms, their places and homes have been destroyed, and then they have an entire mess to come and clean up afterwards. The short terms are ones that their families are using as well. And when their families aren't using, they open it up to people that want to stay up here, and so that they can also make some income for themselves as well, instead of their home just staying empty. I thought it was ironic this year when we had a surplus in the money that was budgeted under the tax income of this. And I looked at all the items that was purchased by the city from the tax income revenue off of short-term rentals. And none of those groups seem to complain about all the things that were purchased and funded from short-term rentals right there. And then I think somebody mentioned this already, like there's obviously a need for this within the community and with people coming to visit McCall. So if we cut down housing there, so where do all those people stay? And then if there's fewer people that are staying in McCall, that hurts a whole nother part of our ecosystem within McCall and other businesses. And if we're not doing that, if we're not doing the short-term people and people are backing out from that, then that equals we've got to add more hotels. So where are we going to put hotels? And then I think some of these are good, but if we're not careful and we look at the snowball effect that this has, then people are going to go in a whole different route of uproar, because we may be trying to attack one thing, but again, it's going to mess up a whole other local economy by doing so. And sorry, and I'll just say one last thing. Yep, my mind went blank, so I apologize, but I'll just thanks for letting me have a few minutes.
You can come back again when you remember. You can put your hand back up. That's allowed.
My daughter just walked up next to me right here and was grabbing something. I'm like, I just lost it. So I thanks for letting me comment for a minute, Aaron. I appreciate it.
Of course. Christine, did you want to go ahead and ask your question?
Sure. I'm sorry, I joined late. The email that I got, I think a couple days ago, showed 1:30. So it looks like you guys have been underway for a while.
It showed both 1 and 1:30, and that was my fault. 3 people reviewed it and we all missed that typo, but I sent a second one out this morning. If you email me or just wait, I will go ahead and post the recording, which was like a 15-minute presentation. We'll post that on YouTube, so you didn't miss anything. You can still get your hands around it, but we're still happy to hear your comments or questions.
So you're still gonna have the one at 5:30, because I think I'm gonna benefit by being involved in the meeting. But I just want to ask, you probably said this at the beginning, are these decided, what you guys have sent out, that you've decided this, or is it still up in the air? Like you're still trying to make the decision? Because I also have a big issue with the 2 persons per bedroom, and I'm sure it sounds like everyone's been voicing concerns about that. I literally just bought my place to Airbnb up there. I closed the end of last month, getting ready to list it this month. Didn't even know when I bought it actually that there were any sort of permits, but I've done all the due diligence to get it going, sent my 300 feet letters out, blah, blah, blah. But I'm just really discouraged to see that you're going to possibly be limiting the number of people. My place came with the furniture. There was 2 bunk beds that are full beds. So they do fit 4 persons per bedroom. I did get rid of one and put a queen in, so I'm just only gonna have one room with a full with 4 people in there. I want to be able to still have that. That is part of my reason for doing what I'm doing, is, you know, helping out with income, and I am concerned about safety and so forth. And I didn't hear what the safety concerns were necessarily, but I hope to hear about it at 5:30. But I know, just looking in my research, there's a lot of people that do depend on having bunk beds to be able to house more than 2 people per room. So I'm hoping that that is definitely not something that's set in stone, and you guys are going to reconsider that and maybe look at different ways to address any concerns you have with that. I just want to be able to voice my concern about that as well.
Thanks, Christine. Michelle, do you have a comment on that?
Yeah, I guess my only comment is that what was put up on the screen earlier is basically suggested policy based on research and kind of best practices that we know today. But again, nothing's been decided. Ordinances haven't been written. Part of what we wanted to do was get feedback on it prior to formalizing anything that we bring to planning and zoning and city council.
Thanks.
Okay. So I'm going to read a comment from the chat window. Michael Chu wrote, will the same health and safety occupancy standards for short-term rentals be applied to long-term rentals? And if not, why?
Right now, we don't currently permit long-term rentals. That might be something that we could look at in the future, but that's not necessarily what we're currently considering.
Okay, so let's go with Jules.
Yeah. Hi. Hi, everybody. It's a privilege to be here, and thanks to Kelly Hill for notifying all of us others who never would have even known this meeting was happening today. So I think education and transparency is the most important thing that we can do as a community, and everybody needs to be notified via however we need to do it. I've had a few run-in conversations with some locals in the community lately, and they've had this really poor attitude towards vacation rentals. And after about a 30-minute conversation, had a complete transition of, oh gosh, well, I didn't really understand that, or I didn't know that, or, you know, I was so unaware of. And so I applaud these forums. I think it's important. We've started the short-term alliance here because we all want to work together as property managers in making the best decisions that we can together, working together to help make our community feel comfortable and safe. I know on our part, we have eliminated occupancy when we took over the company last year, and they were, I mean, pushed out to the limits with, you know, cramming people. And one of the first things my husband and I did was take those numbers down to promote safety and make sure that, you know, that the people that we were putting in these properties were functional. And so we did that on our own part. We also mitigate through all of our check-in instructions on being compliance with what the city of McCall requires for quiet hours. We mandate them. You know, we do everything on our part. When I took over the company to ensure that all of the fire extinguishers were current, every carbon monoxide detector and fire smoke detectors were up to code. I mean, we've followed everything that you have asked us to do, and we'll continue to do so. As far as the occupancy, you know, the majority of our rentals are family oriented with children, a lot of them that have toddlers that aren't going to go sleep in another room to uphold a number, you know, from 4 to 2. So that's something really important that we want to try to fight for. As far as, you know, of course we want to follow regulation, and we enjoy the business and what we're doing and bringing to the community. And also I sell real estate with Real Estate in McCall, and, you know, people are coming up here to buy homes to cover their mortgages. Hence, you know, if it was a long-term rental and local housing, they wouldn't be able to afford the house payment anyway, because the mortgages are so high. So that's a whole nother topic. But in any case, we're here to work with you guys. And, you know, I really believe with what Kelly said in regards to, and also Brent, about, you know, being realistic with the room size, the square footage of the property, and then, you know, individually mandating the number of occupants per room on that note. So thank you.
Thanks for those comments. I just want to address that, you know, all the people that were invited to the meeting today were taken out of their business license information. So I did actually field a couple of phone calls this morning of people who had emails sent to an alternate email. Maybe that's where they pay their bills. And so we are looking into alternate ways for notifying you. And the reason why this wasn't necessarily broadcast publicly was because we wanted this to be specific to you, right? We wanted to talk to property managers and business, and you as owners and homeowners, and not just open it to the masses, because then we wouldn't get anywhere, right? So this is what this is for, is to get your feedback. Michelle, did you have any other comments before I move on to the next person? So in looking at the chat window, one question came up, which with the increase of regulations, how do you plan on enforcing the regulations? And what do you expect the increased cost to be to cover the administration of these regulations and enforcement?
Yeah, so we did talk to the council about this because obviously your regulations are only as good as your enforcement. So what we're talking about is kind of, we're basically trying to be proactive, especially with the health safety issues on the front end of the permitting. And so that's where the inspection process comes in. We've been working really closely with McCall Fire District, which is not part of the city of McCall. It's a separate public agency. And so we've been coordinating with them. Ultimately, they will be hiring another person to manage this. Right now, we have about 500 short-term rentals within our community. So that's a very large number. And so even the rollout and the timeline of this is likely to change because it'll take a while to do inspections, right? And so we want to be realistic about, you being able to run a short-term rental at the same time, for us to be able to kind of check. So there's kind of definitely added administration at that front end. And I think then also we've talked with our council about the tail end, about the code enforcement piece. That is also something I think that the city council will be looking at is making sure that we have enforcement so that they're not just a bunch of regulations that go unchecked. Right now, our McCall PD does respond to code complaints from neighbors related to noise, parking, those sorts of things. And that might be something that we need to beef up in the future, depending on how things go. But that's something that we would work with, within our organization, kind of at the direction of our council and the budgeting process to figure that out. We do have one full-time code enforcement officer, but that person doesn't work 7 days a week, right? So we also have patrol for our police department responding to some of the calls. I will say that when we did change the regulations and require the contact information of the property owner, that did reduce our calls quite a bit. So I think that seems to be working in terms of property managers being able to respond to, or homeowners being able to respond to specific complaints related to their rentals, as opposed to tying up our police department when they need to be doing other things. So we may be looking at more of a code enforcement officer kind of enforcement piece related to this.
Okay, another chat that came through was, let's see, many of these investments were made before this kind of regulation. Has the concept of grandfathering been considered a la Bend? So apparently this is something that happened in Bend.
Yeah, so basically, grandfathering is an interesting legal or not legal term. So we looked at that issue when we were considering the large short-term rentals and requiring conditional use permits. Obviously, if they're existing, we can't prohibit them, in that case. And so the same thing would apply. I mean, we have to apply the same safety standards regardless of when they're established. If the idea is health and safety and basically neighborhood sort of like character and compliance, I mean, those things carry forward regardless of what year it is. So, if there was any sort of like major, I imagine like building or structural thing, which we're not proposing at this point, then that would be sort of a grandfather issue, but we're not really, what we're talking about is some pretty minor, I think minor changes to regulations that are already in play.
I also got another one from Aspen Timeshares who said, will you be limiting the parking per rental as well as the number of people that can stay in the property? When they did their CUP, they were limited on parking spaces and how to allow for health and safety.
Yeah, so parking is already managed by our city code, so we're not proposing to change that. If they went through a CUP process, it might have been prior to the existing, the 2020 regulations, but basically parking is limited to 1 parking space per bedroom today. So we're not proposing to change that.
And then I see another one, when Valley County regulated last year, the fire department or fire chief categorically said he would need to massively increase his staff, that inspections would become a bottleneck. So I don't know if this person's on here. When you're referring to Valley County, I guess you're referring to Donnelly Fire Chief, or are you speaking of our McCall Fire Chief? I wouldn't feel comfortable for staff commenting on that because we're not aware of it. And it's actually, if it came out of law enforcement, we'd want them to comment on it, but I will make a note of it and try to find the answer for you.
Yeah, I'm the one that wrote it down, Jim Evans. And I was at the ordinance review process at Valley County last year. They took a very different approach than McCall had taken at that stage and became very activist. Inspections required, show me the plan of the house every year, that kind of thing. And they had multiple people. It was the acting fire chief of Valley County at the time that came up and testified to the commissioners that he just categorically, he said, I just can't do that. I'd have to take my staff from, 1 to 10 times in order to handle that. So there's a practical side of things.
Bullshit.
So what I will say,
Well, thank you for that.
Jim, what I will say is that we've been proactively working with the McCall Fire Department and the fire chief. And so the inspection process and some of the health safety kind of requirements as it relates to some of the things I mentioned, obviously there's been issues with propane in our community and that sort of thing, propane explosions and that kind of thing. So again, it's very much a partnership between our agencies and trying to figure out, we don't want to over-regulate this thing because again, we're limited by resources, but we want to sort of build in a process that we feel addresses those health safety issues and is reasonable and sort of in line with other communities. So that's our goal.
Yeah, thank you,
Okay.
Jim, for the bullshit comment.
I think we'll just, let me see this as a comment. It looks like a lot of the rest of these are like comments. So a couple of things, I'll let Michelle close out, but obviously this was recorded as we discussed. I will be posting it and then we'll be collating all this data from the chat, from all of your comments. And we have a few more minutes if Michelle wants to have any wrap up comments about the way forward. And of course, we will have that meeting later on this evening at 5:30. And I'll do my darndest to see if I can't get some fire chiefs on there. Michelle?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Erin. I was just making a note of that as well, because I think a lot of the questions seem to be related to that. But I just wanted to say thank you, everybody, so much for your time and taking time out of the middle of your day. We really appreciate it. I know I took some good notes and I think there were some good suggestions. So again, the idea is to sort of hear from everybody and try to get as much input to sort of ultimately, hopefully the end product's better. So yeah, we appreciate all your comments. If you think of something after the fact, feel free to get in touch with us. If you have any other ideas, again, feel free to email us. We're always available or give us a call.
Yeah, and if anybody wants to reach out to me directly, I put my email in the chat. You feel free to email me, egreaves@mccall.id.us. I can do a couple of things for you. One, make sure you're on the short-term rental email list going forward, and then also connect you with any public possibilities for you to stay more informed of what's happening at the city. So thanks all for being here, and maybe we'll see some of you at 5:30.
All right, thanks everyone.
Everybody wave.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for your time. Appreciate it.